Good to be here.
Let's go ahead and go back.
Jason Brown, I'm a graduate student going for operations management here at University of Arkansas.
I'm Jason Ray. I'm the FBI's National Security Supervisor here in Fayetteville.
Thank you. Well, we're seeing more and more activity in the drone UAS world, which is outstanding. One of the jobs I've got on campus here, which I really don't appreciate, is I get to approve every request to fly a drone on campus. And there are some pretty unique drone applications. As Rich says, the form comes to me and I give it to Rich, and he looks at it and says, yeah, that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense when we approve it. But like Rich said, there's always a little humor when we look at some of these drone applications, so it's fun. So everything from taking pictures to remote sensing to taking a look at how we can do construction better than just, I don't think my imagination is enough to think of all the uses that we've got for these. So I'm looking forward to hearing what the topics are going to be discussed today. Just as a closing comment, Sarah is my PhD student, and what we're looking at is to go a step beyond that. We're doing our research on flying cars or on-demand mobility. So if we try to figure out how a drone fits into the air traffic control system, what do we do when we start flying cars around? Can you get a speeding ticket in a flying car? I don't know the answer to that, but we're off looking at how the electronics and the avionics are going to go together. So to us, this is a step as we move forward. And with that, I think, Rich, are you on tap here? So let me turn this over to Rich again. Thank you for coming.
I am Rich Ham. As you can see, I'm distracted this morning already as we try to do the introduction. But I want to thank you for coming. The groups here will come and go and ebb and flow during the day based on what people said at different times they could come. But I think we've seen some significant changes. I would just ask, how many of you were at the summit last year? So last year we started out with 30 or 40 and ended up with 80 or 90. This year we did offer some streaming, and we have people that are watching a stream and might ask some questions during the presentations. I think what's changed dramatically is how much has been added. I mean, last year people were like, well, I even had a few people say, hey, I think we're kind of getting to the peak of this, and we're nowhere near the peak of this. We're just starting to scratch the surface of what's happening. Last year we did a half a day, and this year we could have easily done 2 days with people that have new initiatives and things that are going on. What I hope it becomes, and I will ask some of you at the end of the day, we will ask to come up with some ideas for hosting maybe quarterly around the state, but to have more and more interaction. Because what we see is, we were having breakfast this morning and talking. It's like a startup. It is a startup. And what you see is there's a lot of misinformation originally, or people trying to get in quickly. We hope these kind of forums help people search, whether you want to do research or looking to apply them to your industry, to help you make some decisions so that you don't spend money and make some of the wrong mistakes. I'm a retired Air Force guy, and one of the things that we used to look at, or that I used to get was humorous, is some of the performance evaluations that were typically in the Royal Air Force. And one of them that was always applied to me was, this guy never makes the same mistake twice, but I'm pretty sure that he made them all once. So because of that, I would say this will give you the opportunity to share some of the mistakes we've made and to learn some things, I hope, that will help you in your journey. So today we're going to talk about, first quickly we'll talk about the agenda, where we've been, what's changed this year specifically, and where we kind of want to go and hope that we can come up with a way forward. Pretty full schedule, and you can see here at about 8:45 that we're already a little bit late. We're going to then immediately after that, or at 9:15, we're going to have a discussion. Troy Ho's going to come and talk about their new actual minor in unmanned systems. And so that is an indicator of what demand is, because we're wanting to make sure that our kids that come to school, or our graduate students, whoever comes, we're able to give them the skills they need to be successful. several good discussions on both threat, some of the new things about cybersecurity. What you'll see is some projects we're in, a couple of those. And then in the afternoon, we'll have quite a bit of time to talk again about not just some more projects, but also some things that are real-time in the news. We'll have a presentation on earthquakes and the new application that one of our faculty here has done. So, since last year, you see several things that, at least for the U of A, has done, and several of you here have been involved in. One is some growing research projects that include collaboration with national labs, and industry collaboration. Anytime that you see something that's new and the technology is changing so quickly, as it is in the drone and the UAS world now, the ability to work with industry, we can't overrate how important that is, because you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get an academic look and kind of an application of some scientific views, but industry will push you to do things quickly, to try new things, to move forward and to be early adopters and to see whether or not this will really work. And ultimately, they will push you in academia, not just to publish papers, but at the end with that published paper to have an application that would be used. So, as the land grant, one of the things that we're charged to do is to make sure that we're doing that so that we can improve the life of the citizens of Arkansas, and that what's provided actually has utility at the end. We have academic collaboration, so within the system, with other institutions, we're collaborating, and it seems like almost every day, even this week, we had another institution in to speak about how can we work together to learn from each other and then to advance the body of knowledge. Last year, we talked a little bit about some things we were doing on campus, and that we had scheduled an upcoming UAS. We refer to it, the slang term is the foundations course, but also we had already done, and we're in the process of a remote sensing course that Geosciences CAST was doing. Those have been successful. We're in the second round of those. We had 24 students get their 107 certificate after the foundations course, which, as we talk later today about some of the compliance requirements, I think you'll see why it's important that you have a plan to get people to get their 107 certificate so that they'll be able to do more, understand more about the system. The remote sensing course, some of the things that are being provided, and we'll have a little bit of that later to talk, but talking about the utilization of drones and then doing things like building models, doing some hyperspectral measurement, and actually seeing what you can get out of that drone. It's one thing to fly it, it's another thing to take that equipment, and Fred Limp's teaching that course right now, I think, and so there's some pretty dramatic things that have happened over this year. We've learned a lot ourselves, and we're certainly glad to share about flight planning optimization. So looking both for how does a sensor, the end state is what are you going to get out of a sensor typically, and then how do you optimize when you flight plan. As a pilot, I do that every single time before I climb into an airplane, and so the change is this idea more and more, you don't just go down to Best Buy, fly it, power it up, and charge it, and then just fly it. Recreational flyers do that and it's fun, but often folks will try to make that same application, that same level of preparation for something that's a more serious endeavor. We've learned quite a bit about why that doesn't work. We've got some industry collaborators here that'll talk this afternoon, and they'll tell you some of the things they've learned as well with that. And then we've gained some experience with different sensors about what's good, what's bad, what works and doesn't, and then some of the challenges that we would always be ready to share. So here's the thing I would say. We're going to have a great briefing, and I'm thrilled that we were able to get the FAA and the FBI back again. But you know, just a few weeks ago, when the FBI director gets up and says, you know, an attack, terror drones are coming here to the United States imminently. So the challenge I think that we have in the research space and industry space is this. So I travel to conferences to stay on top of what's the best, most current anti-drone stuff out there. And so this is one of the demonstrations that's presented. Now, I'm not saying that that's not completely unusable, because it is. It has a utility. But I will say this. I think we can do better than this. I don't think the nets would be very effective against swarms, and we know that the ability to develop swarming is really already done and therefore can be used by people with nefarious intent. So the research space to see how do we take over a drone. I'll give you one example. You hear people a lot talking about let's shoot them down. You see some of these, and some of our presenters will talk about today. So here's Latrice 600 can carry 35 pounds. So 30 or 35 pounds. If you had 30 or 35 pounds of explosives and you shot that down over the Razorback game, you probably didn't succeed in what you wanted to do. In fact, it's probably just as bad as it would have been to start with. So there has to be something different. There has to be a way to take them over, and there's a lot of room in that space for industry and for academia to do research and figure out how do we learn how to defend against those, because it's not just us. We've been talking about this for some time, and the director of the FBI says, hey, this is going to happen. It's imminently going to happen. It's just a matter of time. First responder use. Given what we've had going on this past year with hurricanes and wildfires, flooding, and the like, earthquakes, when you look at that and you look at what drones can do, insurance companies now, some of them actually have trained and are employing their own fleet of drones to assess. In Houston, more than one went down there. As soon as the FAA let them do it, they were doing these large assessments for claims using their own UAS and their trained pilots. So, you know, academically, all of us, or a high-end industry, we talk about the application, but there is a base application in just having people knowing how to follow the rules, how to collect data to do claims. There's a whole new skill set that's emerging. And so there's a space there to do everything from, I would say, basic skill set training all the way to the more advanced things that we will talk about today. And there's clearly going to be a job market, and there's an economic engine that's developing about that. Precision agriculture, we'll be talking about some ag things later today. But one thing in particular I think to pay attention to is how agriculture, for lack of a better term, accepts precision agriculture. What exactly will come out of it? What is the actual benefit that you can see immediately and that farmers would say, hey, I can use this? We were having a discussion this morning about one of the fears we have, or we hope that a group like this prevents, is that some of the things that you go to conferences and you will talk to people about their research and the kind of equipment they have to sell, and they will give you some information as kind of a soups to nuts solution, and then a farmer buys it and it's not. It's not so much a soups to nuts solution. And so that can actually cost you many years, because that farmer will tell 100 of his friends it didn't work, and then consequently people push off of that. So we hope that groups like this, especially within Arkansas and the state, can share what they've learned about who's doing the kind of work that makes sense, who can you trust, what things, what sensors, what platforms really do have utility, and then provide good information that citizens can use to improve their yield. Basically, that's what we're after. And there's some other side benefits about all the way from carbon sequestration to how we look at preserving and the land in general. So there are a lot of benefits that UAS have when they're used appropriately for that. So there's a lot of rumors, but we've had the first confirmed, publicly anyway, collision. And anybody can tell me when they look at this, so this was found just above the rotors, actually sat there when this helicopter that was patrolling for security to support the UN Security Council meeting. So When you look at that, for those of you that fly around, what do you think that piece that they found in the bowl, they call it, just under the rotors is? Anybody know where it came from? It's definitely a Phantom. It's a Phantom 3 or 4 probably, or what, you know. So, you know, for most of it, you know, the first report came out, I'm like, I don't know. And then they showed that, and I'm like, yeah, pretty much that's what happened. So you can immediately see that there was a collision. Now here's the issue that we don't know yet. Some of our friends from the FAA may have better, but it's not. We're not completely sure that that operator was operating illegally. I'm not sure yet. I looked at the airspace. I didn't see that there was a TFR. So he or she may or may not. I think there was an altitude thing that maybe they were too high, but a helicopter could have been easily flying in the same airspace. So the question becomes, if it's illegal, obviously, that if he or she was flying that illegally, then it's a procedures thing. But if not, then again, groups like this, it's about trying to figure out what are the solutions to prevent these accidental, which the more that there are, when we start getting to 1 million UAS flying, the more that there are flying actively, I mean, it doesn't take much to figure that we have a higher chance of having a collision. This one, relatively, I mean, they had some shake. I heard that originally the pilots had said they thought they had a chip like some others, which would have been catastrophic, but they didn't. But they did have some vibration because of that. And so they made an emergency landing so that they could see what was going on with the aircraft. And when you pick this out immediately, I mean, the investigation of that didn't take very long for them to know what it was. And it did significant damage. So there's some technology there, even, you know, monitoring ADS-B, which for a manned aircraft is very familiar. That's technology that's relatively inexpensive to try to figure out so that a drone operator has a situational awareness to know. That could be a simple solution. It may require more, but I think, again, it's this kind of group that's going to make those kind of discoveries, if you will. If you look at the things, and the FAA is spending time trying to figure out how to get us into, when I say us, those of us that want to operate frequently to do some things that right now are difficult to do under some of the current regulations without waiver. The universal traffic management, the study, the concept of how do we figure out ways to put the UAS into the national airspace system in a way that it's safe and integrated and has a lot of the same controls that we experienced in manned aircraft. ADS-B is one, although the transmission in ADS-B is not a good solution because for air traffic it would literally, there would be so much data that the controllers couldn't sort through it. But using it for receive modes, and there's already some of the commercially available units that have an ADS-B receive possibility, or the ability to receive ADS-B, actually can become part of the solution. And when even in the early days, for instance, some of the waivers that we have for the Class D or for the TFR, every bit of that we can show that we've improved our situational awareness increases the chance the FAA would look at that favorably and say, yes, we think that you've provided an equivalent level of safety, and so therefore we'll approve it. Everybody that is spending any time in UAS research or space wants to figure out how we're going to finally get to a point that we can do the kind of work that we think will have the most utility and give the most use to our citizens in Arkansas or mankind, know that the line of sight is where we have to be. But we have a lot of pieces that are missing. Things about how we communicate, the maintenance and reliability, both of the comms and also how secure as far as the cybersecurity piece. Frequency management about how we would do that, and whether or not we have not just the bandwidth capacity, but whether or not we also would be able to void, or rather to push back from any nefarious attackers or hackers that are trying to come into the space. But without being on line of sight, you're left to, the FAA has a Center of Excellence that's doing that work, that it is comprised of universities, that is trying to figure out that. Now, the military has that figured out and has had for some time. And so our hope is that building on some of those kind of the work that's already been done will eventually get here. If you think about it, the ability to do inspections, staying within line of sight, has an application for you to still be able to see it and see kind of beyond what you could see on the ground. But for the work of search and rescue and some of the other law enforcement work, which there are some waivers for that, but also for just inspections of power lines or others that have great utility, all those dull, dirty, and dangerous things that we want them to do safely beyond line of sight, we got to figure it out. And there's some research that we need to do in this area. Flights over people has a lot of the same things. One of the things that, and we'll talk shortly this afternoon on the compliance requirements in 107 as a review, but maintenance and reliability, obviously. We want to know what will happen if that aircraft, so as an example, if you have a quadcopter and you lose part of one prop, the ability to feather props, things that we think about in the manned aircraft world, that automatically you know what you need to do to make the aerodynamics stable, the ability to do that and try to recover so that you don't hit people or don't fall to the ground, or backups associated with batteries, those sorts of things. There's still plenty of work, there's work being done, but there's a lot of room in that space to look. The accident data, the FAA, I think, made a good pragmatic decision on the reporting requirements for accidents. So it's good pragmatically because, and basically it's $500 exclusive of your drone or any injury to people or property that would exceed that. So the problem is, I am all but positive that a lot of the drones, a lot of UASs are crashing and never meet that threshold requirement because all they did was destroy their drone. But we're missing some data to figure out what was really going on there. So the kind of things that NTSB has built over a long period of time, that they have good databases, they do a safety investigation, they figure out or do a root cause analysis, and we come back to figure out what to do. We're going to miss some of that. Because if you crash your manned aircraft, you're going to report that. And it's not going to be less than $500, I can tell you for a fact. And many of you that own one know there's never any kind of penalty that's less than $500. But nonetheless, the point I'm making is this is a policy solution of what do we do. Maybe there's a voluntary way to do that. Maybe there's a proposal that we can ask for. But if everybody that crashed their UAS, first off, let me ask you, and I'm sure the FAA will give us a non-attribution here. How many of you have ever crashed your drone or UAS?
I've heard about a guy.
I had a friend that had this situation. So the point is this. Most of those only result in the loss of the UAS, not in reaching the threshold. So the data, the accident investigation data, we're missing. So if this is the body that's going to try to research and be the folks that figure that out, one of the questions that we would ask, and I did ask at the FAA AUVSI conference last year is, so how do we get that data? Because I'd like to have that data. I'd like to look at that and see, because if I could figure that the root cause was batteries or pilot error, which is kind of in the manned world where about 90% of them end up landing, but whatever it is, if we can figure that out, then it helps us to build what is the solution to that, and therefore from that come up with a way to adjust the needle, move the needle on the risk analysis so that we can start doing more flights over people in a way that it makes sense and it's safe, and we have a level of safety that makes not just the FAA, but the American people, citizens, happy. Cybersecurity, so how many of you have heard about the issue with DJI and security? So this is interesting, and this space, I think, the security piece coupled with the drone protection, anti-drone pieces, the one that I see the most growth in. People wanting to know the security, how do we figure this out, how do we maintain security? Interestingly enough, the Army has backed off this a little bit, which they have some policies now that they can actually put in and use these. But the key is it's both a hardware and a software issue. And so what transmissions are going, where packets of data are ending up, and then who's using that data is an important thing to understand. So some of that could be self-monitoring. There's some space there, and I see more and more literature about the ability to self-monitor where packets are going, and the ability to see what's going to happen with the data once you've used it. And that's everything from if you're connected to Wi-Fi while you're flying, all the way to when you go to process that with a third-party vendor. DJI has many, many agreements with some of the third parties that aren't owned by them, but many of us would have used, that where they have put their data into that software to make it easier to gather DJI data. So trying to figure out how that works together and making sure and ensuring that we know where it's going to self-monitoring is an important part of the space that's out there too. And obviously the hacker issue is a growing concern. So where we're going, there's no doubt that there's a lot of different types of studies that have great potential for interdisciplinary work. But in the UAS world, it is almost all. There's a few that are kind of narrow, but the interdisciplinary work is all but unlimited. Anything that you can think of, a discipline that you think of, everything from how do you fly the airplane, how do you process data, how do you develop new sensors, how do you the way that you protect it from being hacked, to what should the policy be, I mean, what makes sense policy-wise, to analyzing accident data. All of those things across several disciplines is the growth. And the most successful projects and groundbreaking work that's done have an interdisciplinary approach, and that work has become more and more between disciplines. Industry collaboration is absolutely, to move this forward, an important part. A lot because of what I said earlier. But the thing in some of the projects we've been involved in that you notice immediately is, you know, the natural tendency for academia is, wait, I want to see all the data in the world possible to view before I make a decision. I'm being a little facetious, but the point is, we want to see things, we want to see a lot. And industry's pushing, no, I think there's a place for us to move here. Let's figure out a way to move. And so that natural, two different worldviews, when they come together, ends up producing the best product. I've seen it, I believe it, and I think that's going to be an important part of the way forward. AUVSI, and today hopefully we'll have that talk at lunch, but that starting a state chapter for Arkansas is, I believe, an important part for us to be able to have access to data and also access to some of the advocacy that's happening in DC. There's some things when we talk about the in academia for the FAA educational use memorandum that I would like to see some things I think safely could be changed in how that's interpreted, and it would have the same level of safety, and we would be able to move some things forward quickly, and some of that, and again, naturally it's the way that it should be to make it safe, but I think there's some ways always to tweak those over time as we learn things. Applied research, so all technologies that move quickly, and this is one. The FAA will say, and in the spring when I went to the conference, the administrator said that their biggest struggle is keeping up with the technology. About the time that they think they have something figured out, new technology comes and they always feel like they're playing catch up, trying to figure out how to do this because the technology constantly changes. That automatically lends itself to applied research because long-term studies to figure out something, by the time you get to the end of the utility of that research, in many cases, it's overcome by events. There's already been implemented, things have already changed, and so it lends itself to a lot of applied research. The cost, and if you look at some of these units, and some of our folks here today will talk to you about what can be hundreds of thousands of dollars that are invested in machines. What that drives is something, a more aeronautical based approach, aeronautical decision making. Because if you asked one of these folks, hey, do you just fly that haphazardly? What's the impact if you were to crash that? And then, you know, sweat starts beating on their forehead just thinking about it, because it is very expensive. And so this idea of paying attention to maintenance records and making sure that the density altitude is where it should be, that I have planned this appropriately, and so I've removed as many risks as I possibly can. You'll never remove all risks. I'll never forget my original flight, my basic flight instructor said, when we were talking about risk management, he asked me, he said, how can you eliminate all risk from this flight? So I started naming some things. He goes, the only way you eliminate all risk from this flight is if you don't fly and go home. There's always a level of risk. You have to manage that risk, and the way that we do that is teach. And we do it here, and I know Troy does and others, but we're teaching how do you manage that risk, just like you do before you fly. The issue about highly complex sensors, I believe that because of what we're seeing in the more advanced sensor work, that we will see more and more of the work being done the way that the military does things, and that we're going to have a pilot and an operator. We're going to find ourselves at a time where we're going to have a separate operator who's focused on the system, the sensor, making sure that it's doing what we need, at the same time that we have a pilot making sure that we're safe, not running into things, etc. All of the areas that we could go, all the time, there's current research happening. Amazon, Walmart, others about supply chain, what's going on with transportation, education and technical training is growing, like I said, because the skill set is growing all the way from someone who wants to just be that person working for the insurance operator to gather claim information to somebody doing very advanced work with very expensive equipment. We had a paper, one of our graduate students, I think, is here, that wrote a great paper on the use of UAS to make a detection in cold storage at a distribution center to see where the leak's happening, what's going on with the refrigerated units, and then the use of those to make decisions on whether food should be loaded on a unit or not, and what you should do to save money. It doesn't take very long for industry to figure out that kind of the return on investment for those makes a lot of sense, and we're going to see more of that. We see it all the time, more and more developed. Okay, in interest of time, we're going to go ahead and start and do a question session after. We'll have the ability for people that are streaming to send some questions in that we can answer. But quickly, are there any questions before we start anybody would have before the next session comes? Okay. All right, I think we're ready to load more hose. Which one is yours for?
Well, good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Troy Hose. I'm the Chair and Director of Harrison State University's Department of Aviation. I'm going to speak to you briefly today, and hopefully the word brief will uphold, about our approach to drones right now in using or implementing a drone miner. You'll see in a minute, we've been in aviation for quite a while. And what we are doing is we're kind of bridging the gap between our aviation expertise across many disciplines, because if I bring someone in to learn to fly an airplane, they're going to fly an airplane for a living. But if I bring someone in to use a drone, they're going to use the drone probably in support of what they do for a living. So we kind of took an approach of bridging our department along with many other departments across campus to offer a drone miner. And like I just mentioned, drones, we understand, are not just an aviation-only specific event. Now, I want to take a moment here and say, I imagine some of y'all are going, okay, who's Henderson State University, and what's this aviation program speak of? Give you just a little bit of background to let you know how we got into drones, and how we're getting into drones, and why the minor. Henderson State University is in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. It's located about halfway between Little Rock and Texarkana if you're going down I-30. It's a 4-year state institution. Hence Henderson State University. We have approximately 3,500 students, I've been told. Many disciplines offered, one of which is the Department of Aviation, or school housed under the School of Business. We offer two major tracks currently. The professional pilot track is for students that want a full aeronautical education as well as their commercial pilot certificate to go and be airline and corporate pilots. That's kind of the bread and butter of our aviation department at the moment. But we also have a management track for students that are interested in the business side of aviation. So that's what we've been doing. We've been doing it for quite a while. We've actually been involved in aviation since the 30s. Henderson and even Washington University for a brief period of time in the 30s started doing flight training for the military, cadet training program. Henderson carried that on and actually started a degree-granting program in 1972. The program has continued to grow. We currently, as one metric, we currently have 17 aircraft in support of our flight training program. A couple of key dates here. 1996, we constructed an airway science curriculum, or an airway science center on campus, 36,000 square foot facility, and updated our fleet of aircraft in the interest of growing our program. 10 years later, we constructed another facility at the airport to better take care of our flight training program and purchased yet additional aircraft. So in 96, we got airplanes in the building. In 07, 06 and 07, we got more airplanes in another building. I kind of got the 10-year itch. It's 2016, and we need to do something else to grow this program. Well, as I'm growing the program, I need to look at all aspects of the program. And of course, drones are the foremost, the very prevalent thing, but I needed to look to see where we needed to concentrate our efforts. And I'm not going to go into too much data on this, but we looked at a couple of metrics on how to grow the program and how to best assess drones as part of this program. Again, just to kind of give a scope of where we're coming in with our expertise, just a couple of metrics here real quick. I've got up on the board airports in the state of Arkansas that have airline service. The bottom one, airport here, Boone County, did anybody know that you could go to Harrison, Arkansas and catch an airline flight? You can. One metric aviation uses is number of operations. That airport as a whole does 10,000 operations a year, takeoff and landing. Henderson by itself, we do over 15,000 flight operations. So we got a background in aviation. Another thing we were looking at as we were going the program is where do we expand? Can I get more pilots, more high school students out of the state of Arkansas that's interested in being a pilot? Or are we already saturated? What I found out is we're really kind of saturated. We ran some quick metrics and came up with a ratio of the number of airline transport pilots and corporate pilots there are in the United States. And it's just a very small percentage, like 0.04%. It's close to 2% all pilots involved, but that includes private pilots, sport pilots, and such. So we took that ratio and applied it to the number of high school graduates we have in the state. And guess what? The number of graduates we have in the aviation program kind of match that ratio of people that are really interested in being a corporate pilot or an airline pilot. So we felt like we kind of had market saturation there. And guess what? Drones are coming along at the same time that we're looking at how to expand our program. So the next logical step, let me skip down, I already mentioned that. So the next logical step is drones. If we want to grow our program and provide students what they need, they're needing a drone education. So that's obviously what our next step is to get into drones, not getting out of the other business of management and professional flight training. So now that we know we're willing to get into the drones, the question was, how do we best serve the student? If I'm trying to get someone to go on the professional pilot track, again, I know that their livelihood is going to be sitting in the cockpit of an airplane. But not so much for a drone. We've already discussed it with everything we've talked about already today. Someone's going to use a drone for agriculture. Someone's going to use it for researching this. Someone's going to use it for evaluating insurance claims and such. So we realized the way that we can better serve the student is not to have a drone major, or at least at this point not a drone major, but a drone minor, so that someone that is interested in criminal justice as their major can get a drone minor. And what we do is we lend our aviation expertise to help everyone get their 107 certificate, but again, as what's already been alluded to, not just take the test. We do more than test prep. We go one step further to make sure that you can pass the test, obviously, but how do you apply best practices, best principles, and actually use this aircraft in the national airspace in a responsible and educated manner. Some of the things that we do with this, there we go, not only do we, again, get you the certificate, but as far as the minor's concerned, we're using other classes that we already have developed for a professional pilot track. As we talked with someone earlier, there's two things you don't want to do as a pilot, or two things you need to be aware of. One is you don't need to get in trouble with the FAA. That's the biggest thing, right? The second thing you need to know is, oops, if I get in trouble with the FAA, how's the FAA work, and how am I going to work with them? Well, we have a class for that called aviation legislation. All of our aviation leaders have to take it. So we're incorporating that in the minor. We're also collaborating in our minor with Henderson's School of Physics and Engineering, so that we have some basic engineering courses, again, because you might use a drone that you buy out of the box and just aren't flying it, or you might need to design your own. So we're again collaborating with the engineering for those steps. There is the full-fledged minor offering that we have. And I think that's going to be about it. Oh, last thing is, we can take care of all the paperwork too. We make it seamless. We do the education, we process all the paperwork. It can be foreign at times if you're not used to aviation, but we have everything right in place. So again, our thrust is, what can we do? How can we lend our expertise as a Department of Aviation that's well-rooted in aviation, and how we bridge the gap to other disciplines across campus? We thought the best way to do that was through a minor. Everybody wins, the student gets something they need, the department grows, and all is well served. So that is a briefing 1 hour minor, trying to get us back on time here. Any questions? Quickly, yes?
I was thinking a couple of courses you had listed started with the 3,000 number. Can anybody take it, or are you expecting a junior, senior type level?
We are expecting a junior, senior level. The reason we're doing it at the 3,000 level, sorry, I'm trying to get away from the feedback there. Our freshman introduction to aeronautics classes are 1,000 level classes, because you cannot use that certificate to earn money. Our commercial pilot certificate on the fixed wing side of the house starts at the 3,000 level and on up to the 4,000 level for a flying instructor and such, because that's where the FAA allows you to commercially operate. Well, once you get your UAS certificate, guess what? You can charge for your services. So we have that starting at that level, kind of parallel the ability to use it commercially. But the engineering courses are the freshman level engineering courses.
When did it go live, and how many students roughly is it being run?
When did it go live? This is our first semester doing it. And I'll explain why we waited until this semester. Again, since we have a program in place, we're a Part 141 Flight Training Academy. We have a little sheet of paper that hangs on the wall called an Air Agency Certificate issued by the FAA, just like an airline gives. As you're carrying your UAS certificate around, that's a certificate. The FAA considers that Air Agency certificate our Henderson's certificate. We could not jeopardize that by doing something that might be a violation of not following a reg the right way. So we had to wait until 107 was on the books to start offering it. So we had kind of everything in place, wait for them to pull the trigger. So this is our first semester of offering it. We have 24 students taking it this first semester. And like I said, it's interdisciplinary. So we have people from innovative media and everything else.
Yeah.
The minor whole is a 12-hour minor.
Troy, are you finding that your students that are already interested in flying manned aircraft who are doing this as a sideline, or other students in management tracks that are doing it?
Yes, our professional pilot track students are very interested in it. The thing, if you're already a certificated pilot, you don't have to go take the 107 knowledge exam. You can take another FAA exam and just show that you have knowledge of 107. You already know the airspace, which is what we're teaching. You alluded to this, we're teaching all of that. So a lot of our pilots have already obtained their UAS certificate, their remote pilot certificate, based upon their previous pilot experience. And what we're looking now is branching out, getting into full-scale government contractor and that kind of thing. We're looking at taking our commercial pilot track, taking off a need for the multi-engine and things like that, and substituting full-scale simulation to branch into the full-scale and develop this into a major track study. Still offer a minor interdisciplinary, but we can see where this, you're talking about the next step, what's coming up in the future. Our future is drone simulation and have this hybrid, what we're currently doing with commercial training, and make that full-scale training.
Are y'all the only people in Arkansas offering?
Um,
Are y'all the only institution in Arkansas offering flight training?
Offering like conventional flight training. We have a 2+2 agreement with those ARCA college where they get the private pilot certificate and transfer in. Because one thing that we have is another certification by the FAA called Restricted Airline Transport Pilot. Our students can become airline pilots at 1,000 hours instead of 1,500. It saves a lot of time. I explained that to get back to your question on the 2+2. FAA limitations, the student can be prohibited from experiencing that full reduction if they do not get their instrument commercial training in their Part 141 at our institution. So we've worked out the 2+2 where they get their training there, that's allowed by the FAA, and then come here. So we're not the only one in that regard, but it is a 2+2 when they start there and finish here. Any other questions? Okay, appreciate your time. Thanks, Rich.
Our next briefing is 188. Gentry, if you'll come up. And this is always well received because obviously the military has a lot of experience in this area, has been flying some very sophisticated units. And I don't know how many of you know that we actually have a unit in Fort Smith. So as part of the state, the ability, and we hope what we do around the state is you begin to see some of the programs that we're putting in and other institutions around the state, including Henderson and others within not just the U of A, but other systems, that we're going to see more and more of our students here stay in Arkansas. I think maybe that they might want to do that for the military, and hopefully stay home is going to get hired away by industry very quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you while he's set you up. You can put this on. Thank you for coming.
Excellent, thank you. All right, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Jeremiah Gentry, go by Cujo. Just a little bit of background about me. I started in Fort Smith, Arkansas, graduated Southside High School, and then went to the Air Force Academy. So went into active duty Air Force for 12 years, flew F-16s, A-10s, and MQ-9s. I flew MQ-9s as a part of the drone program as it started up. But this specific one, which is a newer variant, back in 2008 at Cannon Air Force Base, Clovis, New Mexico. And so I had about 3 years of that before I moved back to Fort Smith, Arkansas and joined the Guard. Flew A-10s for about 2 years and then made the transition to MQ-9s. So I have about 5 or 6 years of MQ-9 UAS experience, and then I have manned experience. As with a traditional guardsman, you also bring in civilian experience. I was hired by United Airlines to fly commercially with them back in 2013. So I flew 737s and 757s for United Airlines out of New York. I'm currently on a military leave of absence, which is allowed up to 5 years. And so I'm serving as a part of standing up this program and continuing to serve as a full-time capacity down in Fort Smith, Arkansas. I'm the Deputy Group Commander at Fort Smith, Arkansas. At Fort Smith, Arkansas, we have 4 groups, 2 support groups, and then 2 operations kind of groups. There is about 300 people as a part of the intelligence group that processes, exploits, and disseminates images, and then also does research, both short-term and long-term, into the systems, to either target systems or you think cyber warfare, and also just images and videos that are being downloaded from the operations group. And so we have both the ability to exploit the images we're pulling in, as well as put the aircraft overhead and continue to process the target based on the airplane that we're flying. And so I'm in charge of or assistant in charge of the operations group, which is responsible for 1 combat air patrol MQ-9. And that MQ-9 then is flown only in combat. We're 60 miles south of here, and that is being flown 24/7. There's no actual MQ-9 UAS parked at Fort Smith, Arkansas. All of them are deployed into other theaters around the country or around the globe, but none are parked on our ramp. Inside of that operations group, we have approximately 250 people to support that 1 combat operation. The intel group has about 350, and then the med group and the supply group make up about another 500. So in our construct of traditional guardsmen and full-time guardsmen down in Fort Smith, we have about 1,000 people working on the airport in Fort Smith. Of those, 300 are full-time, and the other 700 fill the traditional guardsman role, where they're only coming in 1 weekend a month. We've been around Fort Smith for a long time, started in 1953, and then continued to fly a variety of aircraft. Those aircraft typically change about every 5 to 10 years, as you can see. We had started in training, reconnaissance, moved to fighters, attack, and are back to attack. MQ-9 is a variant of both attack and reconnaissance. The last A-10 flew in 2014, and we set up combat operations 2016. Inside the operations group, and basically on station at Fort Smith, is a variety of security levels inside of basically the perimeter, and then you have security, and then through the architecture, you have basically what would be a room, and inside that room, you have a ground control station. That is what we would call a cockpit. That cockpit makes up everything that we need to fly the aircraft. The aircraft, again, is not on home station. The aircraft is somewhere not here. So not only are we beyond line of sight, we're well beyond line of sight and global reach anywhere where you have a satellite footprint coverage. The cockpit then has a floor, an operations floor outside, and there's a bunch of weather personnel and supervisory personnel on that floor, and then you have the room with the GCS. And I'll have a slide later of how we do beyond line of sight and really kind of where it started. But with that, right next to us is also the intel group. So inside of our facility, we have the cockpits, and then we have an operations floor, and then right next to our operations floor, we have an intelligence operations floor. So we can find, fix, and finish. We can basically tell what we're looking at, get professionals to analyze what it is, make a determination on whether it's targetable or not, and then get another group to come in and give us the best solution for how to process the target. And so that's all within just about a 2,000 square foot building in Fort Smith. So the terminology for us anytime you call us a drone. We do not like to be called drones because we're trying to distance ourselves both from negative media attention on the internet and on TV with what a drone does, and then also the idea that there's little tiny drones. And so as it moved to the UAS, we tried to get ahead and call ourselves UAS. UAS or UAV seem to be sticking, and so does drone, unfortunately. But the idea is that it's not autonomous, that we are piloting the aircraft actively at all times. And so to think that the drone is programmed on a search and kill mission without a human in the loop would be extremely incorrect. So that's, I think, an idea that the drone has that we want to distance. UAS seems to be any variety of unmanned aerial system, and we more associate UAS with small UAS, kind of the ones that you guys are talking about here, whereas the plane that we're flying is basically from where I'm standing to the end of that wall. That is nose to tail how big the airplane is, and about from this wall to the third row, the wingspan. It's about the size of an A-10. So it's much bigger than I think most people imagine. It's also much more complicated. It has signal systems on it, sensor systems, satellites, ability to communicate with a variety of ranges, not just C-band, but not just satellite, not just KU or KA, but all variety of signals and frequencies that we can control, either via line of sight, switch over to beyond line of sight, or switch over to what we call remote split ops, where we would do satellite control. So then we tried to distance ourselves from the UAS community by calling ourselves the UAV, or unmanned aerial vehicle, and that didn't really stick. And then RPV, or remotely piloted vehicle, and that's still not sticking. What we're trying to get to stick is the RVA. So to try and distinguish between what's a commercial aviation or what's a search and kill drone, it is not. It's a remotely piloted aircraft, and that aircraft can be any variety of aircraft that we fly. There's 4 or 5 that are more popular in the media, and then this one is more commonly known as the Reaper. And then you have the Pred, or the Predator, which is more, I think, known across most people, in most people's mind, in the military. But we have moved away from the Predator. That is going to be extinct and no longer flown within a year. And so that's a smaller version of what we're currently flying. And to give an idea, the size comparison is both on duration, capability, altitude, and its size. So a 182 or 172 is about the size of a Pred, more of a lawnmower type engine, whereas the MQ-9 turbofan, turboprop correction, and it is able to climb much higher, go much faster, and stay airborne for just as long. The armament is about the same as an F-16. The A-10 carried way more weapons, but the F-16 was about equivalent to what this can carry, and still stay on station 18 hours instead of an hour and a half. So kind of the construct, or what we have done with with taking, it started probably in someone's garage in the 70s. I think it did if you read the Predator. And then it moved on, and the military caught hold of it around the 90s. It started flying in the 90s as just a single pilot. Someone alluded to earlier, a single pilot doing everything to include running the sensors or the whatever operator, whatever signals or spectrum or video that you're trying to pull out. Whatever you're trying to process, whether it's agriculture, real estate, law enforcement, whatever it would be, we quickly found that we did have to get another person to do that. Even though you can make these on pre-programmed missions, you can fly them, you could set them off on their own, and bring them back. As dynamic as things are, either in aviation or in weather, or for what you're trying to do, something becomes of interest to you and you want to turn back around. And how complicated these systems, I think, will get. You'll find that you will need two people. What we have done is put quite a few people, so it started as one person, and now it's closer to that, about 1 to 10 is how many people it takes to put up one aircraft and manage all the sensors. Because we don't really change the platform as much, but as you can imagine, the technology that goes inside and how much can be done with that, and the information overload means that you need to start breaking off bandwidth and handing that system over. And what's really interesting about when you get through the satellites and are able to do it, you can break off sections of that bandwidth, and you don't have to send it all the way back to the pilot or the ground control station. You can pull it into where the satellite terminal is. You can bring it back fiber optic, or you can take it off of there and reroute it to anywhere in the world and have someone else exploit it, someone else control it. So you can find that you can have 4 or 5 people controlling different things on your airplane without your knowledge or with your consent, but you're just told to go somewhere set in that area while they do what they need to do. And so if you get into that level of exploitation, you can find that, well, yeah, now things are rapidly changing and not everything has to be inside this system. For ours, down in Fort Smith, what we control, it's a pilot, a sensor, a mission intelligence coordinator here locally. And then it goes back to a relay station, which I won't mention, but there's a huge construct, another operations center that helps break out all this fiber optic, which you can imagine is quite a bit. This is what I was referring to when you start bringing in too much information. You have to break it apart. For us, that information is already being broken apart and exploited in other places. Just what the pilot has to do on the left is manage about 6 to 7 screens. Each screen for the unclassed side is exactly as what we're talking about. But when you're actually doing it, each screen has a very specific different system that it's managing, and it's not just a tactical display. So if you can imagine that one sensor in the top left screen is being managed, manipulated, and you're trying to no longer fly this, but I think of ourselves as more mission managers. We are just getting the aircraft overhead, and once we do that safely inside the airspace, we are now managing a mission and managing a lot of systems to make sure that that mission gets accomplished. And so there's a different screen for each one, and some of them are tactical data displays, moving maps, basically a sectional, a really fancy sectional with a lot of information pulled in, just like you might get off of an ADS-B into a ForeFlight with Stratus or any variety of GPS or satellite injects. So that's just one. And then the other one is more for the aircraft and how you have to manage it. Strangely enough for us, it's still about 1990s technology on how you move the airplane around on the moving map. So that top moving map tracker is very antiquated and would be equivalent to trying to drive off of the maps that they had in 2000 on some of the deluxe luxury vehicles. And now if you take that and you use your phone, you've got something so much better to drive around, and all that is just a couple of lines, no fidelity, but it's good enough to get you into the location you need to be. And then all the other systems, again, pull in and try and overload what you're doing. If all you're doing is sitting overhead, it's not a problem. If you're actively trying to target, process, and correlate the information that's being done to make sure you're getting the mission accomplished, then it can be very challenging. That's all the pilot sees. That's one screen of the seven that you look at. So flying line of sight, you can see what the airplane is doing. You can react to it. Once you get beyond line of sight, then you have to regenerate that based off the instrumentation. And this is basically all we see. We don't have any cameras around the airplane so that we could see 360. That causes problems with the FAA because we cannot see and avoid. There have been a lot of initiatives to do ground-based radars up to our plane to make them cooperative so that they can sense and avoid, or passive systems that once another aircraft of a certain size or radar signature is seen, that it can sense that and avoid it. All those initiatives have been in effect, and so far to date, none of them have been successful in satisfying the FAA so that we can fly inside their airspace under VFR. We have to be IFR, and we have to fly either with an observer on the ground if we're outside of restricted airspace, or in Class A. And so the only way we can fly stateside is launch out of a restricted airspace, climb up to 18,000, enter the Class A, and then transit. And then even once we get into the Class A airspace, there still needs to be a pathway that the FAA has bought off on that we can fly to get to the next restricted airspace. If it's anything outside of that, then you have to have a certificate of authorization. And those have been very hard for us to get over the years. Getting them in 2008 was next to impossible. And then around 2014, we started really trying to get them in a lot of different locations, and there was heat congressionally and from the Commander-in-Chief to push the FAA to allow the military more freedom of movement. And today, I really haven't seen it, but there is progress. And one of the reasons they hold back is the fact that we just have this picture. That's another MQ-9 flying, and we're watching it from another MQ-9, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. That's another picture of the cockpit. One thing that I think this audience could take away from is how much training we put into both the pilot and to the sensor operator. A lot of times I've been contacted throughout the years of people trying to hire our traditional guardsmen to come in and fly for them or utilize their experience. And to date, the military can pay better than what I think most companies want to do for their small UAS or their upstart, either oil field running along, looking at pipelines. Just they're looking for a minimally experienced person who can not violate the laws in the airspace and keep them from being sued, basically. So minimal liability, and that's not the training you're going to get if you hire a pilot. And so the amount of training that we put into them, we also give them pretty good pay. It takes about 2 years from the time we decide to hire them to the time that they are going to have their wings, which is a different career field now. So the FAA hasn't recognized necessarily the new unmanned qualification to transfer and allow you to jump right into a 172 and fly that, just like a private pilot. The Air Force has also not done that, hasn't necessarily gone that route. So we have 2 routes where you could have an unmanned pilot. For the way I started out in manned aviation, which is the traditional 11U. So this pilot flew something, went to a pilot training base, spent about a year at a pilot training base, and then spent about another year learning how to fly that specific aircraft. In my case, the F-16. And then I did a whole bunch of other things in the Air Force. And when it was time to fly the MQ-9, they sent me to a 5-month course to learn how to fly the MQ-9. So if you look at that, that's about a 2.5-year training if you took out all the other stuff in between. Well, they've taken out the year-long pilot training and minimized it to just meet some basic FAA requirements to where they could fly instruments. So they do T6s and they get some man flying in Pueblo, and then they go to Randolph, and at Randolph they both fly an actual aircraft, but more so they fly a lot of sims of a T6. The trainer that we use, it's about, it's a high-powered 182 or Cessna 210. And that's where they're able to get their minimal requirements to meet the FAA, and then allows them to fly instruments and maintain an instrument rating for us so that they can fly stateside if need be.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
How many pilots are in Fort Smith? Do y'all have?
24.
And are they all required to be officers then?
Yes.
Okay.
The Air Force has not, the Air Force just started the enlisted aviator program,
Okay.
and the Guard has not bought off on that. And so we do not have any enlisted aviators. Up until the end of World War II, it was almost primarily enlisted aviators. And then around the 50s, they professionalized the Air Force, and we became our own service. As soon as we became our own service, pilots were required to be officers. And so until about a year ago, all pilots were officers first and then went to pilot training. All of our pilots at Fort Smith in the 18X program is required to be an officer. The Air Force started an initiative to where someone could take that. So I was about to say 2.5-year timeline for manned. We've shaved it down to about 18 months, maybe 2 years for unmanned. And the enlisted aviator, which is one of the first graduated about 6 months ago, is only in active duty Air Force at Creech Air Force Base or at Holloman. And that one reduced it to a little less than 18 months, closer to about 12 months. And so when I go to the sensor operator, that's who we pulled from, is someone who already had a lot of experience and started trying to waive some of the requirements so that they could be there faster. With the draw of the Air Force, with the draw of the airlines pulling away a lot of our pilots on the manned side, it's created such a vacuum in the Air Force. This was the Air Force's answer. It only saves 8 weeks in your training timeline if you don't send them to officer school. But in my opinion, it was more money driven. It saves a lot of money if it's not an officer. Officers get paid more. Does that answer your question?
Yes. And
Not in Fort Smith.
and how many bases are there with this mission, with the mission that Fort Smith has?
Approximately 20, but don't quote me, 20, 22, somewhere in there. There's 2 more standing up. The Guard has 12, and I think the active duty has 10.
Okay.
And of those, only one of them has an enlisted aviator, and I'm talking a handful, maybe 5 at this time. I think it's California. And then all the other 21 with at least 40 or maybe 200. We're a very small, single-use blip on the radar in this construct. With 24 pilots and only one flying one, that's the minimum. And that's kind of what the Guard tries to do anyways. So.
Thank you.
Yep. These are all the courses that we send the pilot through and a sensor operator. And the pipeline that's changed to try and make the enlisted aviator, I don't know what it looks like. I haven't seen it. Well, actually, they've sent it to me, but I haven't delved into where they've cut things out. But it wasn't just the officer training. They also tried to cut out certain qualifications to get pilots or qualified RPA pilots in the seat faster. So this is where we started out in the early 90s, where it was line of sight operations. Training took place at Creech Air Force Base. They said, this is really cool, why don't we send this over to Bosnia? And they packed everything up in the back of C-17, sent it over, got as close to the front as they could, both humanitarian and intel driven, what's really going on over in Bosnia. Only get it out to about 70, 100 nautical miles before you lose link and you have to bring it back. And so there's a footprint involved, and there's also very limited ability to conduct operations. And then as we decided to experiment with the beyond line of sight, we took satellites and pulled them in. So now the GCS or the cockpit is still in theater. And what this allows you to do is the same pilot who's taking off the aircraft via line of sight ensures that the satellite is seeing the aircraft and can fly it safely, and then flips between flying it via line of sight and C-band, and then starts flying it through KU and satellite. And now you can take it via satellite, and you can take it out to its full range of about 1,500 nautical miles before either gas or time run out, and you bring it back. And then you land it. We're unable to land these. They do not have auto-land capability at this time, so you have to have line of sight to minimize the delay to the point where you don't crash. Because if you try and land one through satellites, even when it's straight up and straight down the same satellite that you're using, you crash them. The delay is too much. One gust of wind, and you've miscalculated, and the aircraft is $1 million, $10 million aircraft is toast. Not to mention all the equipment that's on it.
Is that delay significant, or?
The delay is significant enough to where you cannot account for the changing conditions to land safely. You can take off safely 99% of the time. You can land safely probably 9 out of 10 times. But the cost-benefit trade-off to trying to land one via satellite 1 out of 10 times, you're out 10 million, you don't do it. So, yeah, it's doable, but it's not. It is significant enough you can't. It is not so significant that you can't fly around and not, you don't really notice, except for if you move the control, then you have to wait about a second, and then the airplane reacts. And then your world that's happening 7,000 miles away is kind of a time distortion. It's happening exactly as you're inputting. So the delay, human factors, you don't really see it or notice it. It's just your corrections always seem to be a little bit of an overcorrection, both in the way you move the sensor. But you can still follow people, you can still engage a weapon effectively. You can still do everything you need to for the mission, just not take off on it.
There's a delay there and back, right? So you input, and you move it right, and there's a delay coming back, and you need that heads up so that you see also, right? So
Yeah. And if their world, and it's, I think, classified number, but anyways, let's say it's 10 seconds. It's not, but it's, that world is happening 10 seconds behind everything that you're doing, basically. And so the next slide, we decided that staying underneath the same footprint of the satellite and having that cockpit there was maybe not the most efficient either. So then we started doing remote split ops, which means now from one GCS can just kind of think of it like an aircraft carrier. One cockpit can go out, grab an airplane, pre-flight it, send it up like a paper airplane, throw it, the satellite can catch it, and then they can start flying it. So the LRE can be, the launch and recovery element can be much more effective if you are in theater and just constantly launching these things back to back. You only need one pilot and one crew in theater, reduced footprint. You don't need 5 different cockpits, 24 different pilots and operations center there in theater. So we move all that architecture back across the ocean. And once you do that, then to minimize the delay, we do not go up a satellite in the United States and then go cross satellites and down. We're staying within the same footprint of the satellite. So what we'll do is send it via fiber optics to whatever satellite terminal. So the relay, the predatory satellite link, basically the satellite dish on the ground that talks the satellite up. So as long as that is underneath the footprint where the airplane is flying, then you're good to go. So we send fiber optics across the ocean from Fort Smith, and then we send them up the satellite from the one that's launching underneath that footprint. And by doing that now, the 22 different bases all across the United States can be flying in any different location anywhere in the world. And if weather says that this launch location is no longer viable, weather shuts down all of one theater of operation, then not only can you move to a different continent, you can move all the way across to the other side of the ocean, run through fiber optics, and now be force protection in Korea, or humanitarian aid in Haiti, or wherever the next mission needs to be. So we also do disaster relief. Stateside, it requires a lot of coordination. It requires both state, governor, federal, commander-in-chief, and has to be a viable reason. So the Hurricane Katrina was enough to trigger, okay, we've got the Secretary of Defense's sign-off and congressional, and it meets all the legal authority, we're going to be able to launch these. So for people who are afraid that they are watching them or spying on them, it's way further the other way. In fact, it takes an act of Congress, which you know is hard to get, in order to fly these locally, even if it's a really good reason. The fires in California right now are being supported. So that was enough of a trigger. There happens to be a training base of MQ-9s in LA that launch out of Northern California, and so they're supporting the wildfires that are currently ongoing. And we sent down aircraft and support to St. Croix. This slide's old from the last time California had a fire. And we are currently supporting the one that they're undergoing now.
I have a question coming in
About
from
fire service and how is that routed? The force service that you're trying to help.
How does the approval process work? Is that the question?
Well, no, just the information that you're able to provide to them, how do they get it?
Well, it's a really complicated question because all of our systems are secret. And our typical construct is secret. So if Fort Smith wanted to play, we couldn't. Everything's inside of a secret facility, and so we can't play. It has to be in a select few locations where they are all unclassified and only doing training. Training's happening in Syracuse, New York, LA, California, Creech Air Force Base north of Las Vegas, and then Clovis, New Mexico. And so those locations, and actually Houston as well, so those locations are able to launch because they have aircraft on the ramp. And their aircraft are declassified or not loaded up with weapons or anything secret. So as long as that's the case, and you start with that basic assumption, then you're able to launch and send down the video, either video data link or back up through the satellite construct into an unclassified operations center, which there are a few that exist. Luckily, there's one in California, and those other 4 locations have those. But I don't think that quite answered your question.
I think you just, there's an unclassified route for video that you.
Yeah, it has to be an unclassified route, and it has to be a training base only, which only 4 exist that I can think of. And then that becomes very difficult for us to partnership with any law enforcement, humanitarian aid, is how do we get the video back to the people who need it? And what it didn't answer, what I would like to answer is, if you go through the operations center and the satellite, it's very difficult. It's hard to declassify that information. It's hard to disseminate it. But if you just take a trailer out with what Army people have out in the field, which is a video downlink computer, a tough book, that can receive line of sight frequency, and that's the easiest way where you can have a whole bunch of people scattered around a humanitarian aid where we have video downlink, and I don't think it's C-band, but it's close to a C-band, where we turn on a transmitter and we take our video and we send it down below us. And then anyone who has got, and it's just basic encryption, unclassified encryption, not secret encryption. So if you, as long as you can encrypt that video, you're good, which is just a necessary software encryption. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question coming in from our live chat from Bobby Harris. His question is, I have read about research for tethering UAS for tactical Army units. Do you have any updates on that research?
For researching tethering UAS, can you explain what he means by tethering? Because I've heard tethering being used in either interlinking them across to make them their own relay stations and taking out the satellite out of it, or is he saying he wants to hold it close via some other means?
I'll let him, there's about a 30-second delay, so if you want to take another question.
I think he's talking about, there was a release, and I think it was, talking about tactical units in the Army using backpack tether units that are going to test for nothing except for tactical surveillance. So set them up, tether them, and it only really as far as the tether and power where they can leave it up there to give a perimeter security for 24 hours.
That would be empty NASA.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. And I think that, in my mind, it sounds like the thing that I want with when I go snowboarding. I throw up the UAS and it tethers behind me.
I didn't hear Rich's response, but he just responded and said, hardwired for data and power.
That's kind of like a deer stand in the sky.
Yeah, it would be awesome. It's not something the Air Force wants to do or is interested. It's an Army initiative. Because they're the ones putting people on the ground who want that capability above them to autonomously protect them or provide surveillance, whereas we are trying to interact in a much higher altitude and we're carrying weapons, not just looking for protection of one person, looking for protection of the entire state. So we don't tether and we don't really look to do it either.
I know you had mentioned with regards to the operating theater, the inferior navigation system. Are there any advancements like in the future for, I guess, optimizing that? I know you mentioned sort of like the non-line of sight operation system, so like the literal map that the pilots can see. Is there any advancement in the future for that, or is it just going to be the antiquated system that you mentioned?
There will absolutely be an advancement. This program has been in such high demand since it first got used in the 90s that the ability for that producer, General Atomics, to keep up with how many they wanted and just kept wanting more, faster. How many can you give us? It totally threw our logistical acquisition process out the window. And so, because of that, they could never keep up with our demand. They're starting to get to the point where they can. So the next generation cockpit is called Block 50, and there's talk on whether they get rid of the sensor operator and whether the enlisted career aviator can keep up with the demands of just one pilot being in a room and being surrounded by screens. So yes, it's called a Block 50 cockpit for us, and we're on Block 15. Block 30 is Block 30 is already being filled. We currently fly the older one. The Guard always gets the old stuff. The Air Force is flying Block 30s. Block 30s are an advancement to probably what you're talking about. We currently have a lot better stuff. It's just flown by the active duty Air Force. And then what we'd all like to have is this Block 50, which looks more like an F-35 cockpit. If we end up, and it's always going to be a construct of money and demand. So we're going to demand it at a certain time, and that cost is going to be way too high, and we're going to have to bring it back down to reasonable. But the pictures and what they can do if you go to a conference, and they show you is unreal. So absolutely advancements, but we're still a little bit at the tail end of the acquisition process.
Your opinion coming from the manual, especially fighter pilot, do you think there's a value in whether it's the Air Force commander, chief, FA, whatever, evaluating the idea of allowing, not a civilian necessarily, but highly trained civilians to be brought in strictly for UAS operations, maybe even demilitarized and negating becoming the whole pilot process that we were talking about usually with those targets. You have an appreciation obviously for the aircraft and what it takes to fly those, but knowing now what it takes to fly a UAS from a cockpit, do you think there's any wiggle room in your personal opinion for them to fast track the UAS pilot?
From the civilian community, no. The bureaucracy of the Air Force and the military is so ingrained into our heritage. I think it would be breaking molds that are far too difficult. However, especially if they've already got a solution internally where they're willing to maybe waive some of their own requirements and go, well, maybe we don't need an officer. So that's the first thing you have to see. If the enlisted aviator operation takes off, and then that's not enough. They can't keep up with the demand. The Air Force can't keep enlisted aviators in the cockpit. Then they'll go fast track civilians. But until that time, they're going to recruit from within their own culture. And once they've run out of the entire culture, then they would look to go outside. Now, if you're super smart and those things are already happening, I can guarantee you there's civilian partnerships that are already happening, but they're more on the research side and few and far between.
For your separate sensor operator, can you talk at all about the different types of sensors they're monitoring?
No, not really. Because I can just say that there's what we call classically a sensor operator is mainly operating the camera system, the multispectral, both visible, infrared, and synthetic aperture radar. So those three spectrums of camera systems or just imagery that they can pull off, they're operating in those three. And then what the other ones are operating and doing, no. But that's what that one. But there's other people doing other things. And, no.
So, as you remove the meat sack out of the airplane, you end up pushing the boundaries of these aircraft. I mean, where's the limit? How fast can they go? What are the G's that they can take? I mean, what's the limit?
The limit is going to be the electronics not being damaged inside and structurally the aircraft not coming apart. There is a much higher limit. The human body is around 10 G's, and I think it's the F-35 crew, or maybe the F-22, that they still do. Pilots still need oxygen. Because they have the onboard oxygen generation system that was non-functional when pilots were getting hypoxic and going unconscious. So we're very limited. You take us out, And now you're just looking at what are the newest alloys, what can materials, you're at a materials limit.
For takeoffs and landings, you said you have to be line of sight. Is that like an EP, an external pilot on the actual ramp, bringing it in with the, obviously not one of those, but.
No, it's not one of those. It's just you don't need all the other screens because you're not concerned with operating all the other equipment. So you just have the sensor operator making sure the ball's on the runway.
Yeah.
Because it's out of the kickback. I need to see the runway. And then you land. So it's just a pilot and a sensor inside of a mobile trailer. And so the LREs don't build buildings. The launch and recovery takeoff guys just have a little trailer that's, can fit in the back of a C5, C17, C-130. And you can pick up and move that very small footprint easily, and that's the advantage of that. And then as long as you can take it off inside of a satellite footprint, now you're only limited by the footprint and the time distance model of the airplane.
Can I clarify something on that? And correct me if I'm wrong. So this is something that's different. The military was talking beyond line of sight. They're talking about transmission ability. So, so that's doesn't mean you see it like we do. So if the frequency transmission is set inside, that's how they define it. So you see in the literature a lot of times people will talk about beyond line of sight in the military, or rather, or line of sight for the military. Not the way we think of it. I gotta watch it unaided.
Yeah, I don't need to see it unaided, and he's absolutely right. I just need the frequency to see the airplane.
Right, for that.
And I don't, and the takeoff and land guy is inside of the trailer.
Yeah.
He doesn't see it once he does the pre-flight. He hops in, and he's only seeing things at the camera.
Yeah, he's not out there with his aviators looking right at it.
He's just using that rudimentary heads-up display that I showed you. Altitude, airspeed, horizon. Yes, sir?
It seemed pretty easy to have a dual camera system have an heads-up stereo display, so that it could be more situationally aware. Is it data transmission issue? Are there technology limits that they didn't go that direction?
No, there is a why spend money on it? It's a space and requirements. Good enough to operate in combat. Not good enough for the FAA. Don't care right now. We're flying them in combat, and they're good enough to keep them from hitting other airplanes, either cargo or fighters in combat. So why spend the money when you can go get a better mission system and throw it on there? So again, you're going to carve off that bandwidth, you're going to take your money, and you're going to take your space on the airplane and shove mission essential equipment on there rather than give the pilot more what he wants. Don't worry about him. What's good for the mission. So that's the reason. Absolutely good. But we're not looking to ferry, we're not looking to transit the national airspace system and ferry people. Totally different if you're trying to see and avoid carrying passengers safely. You probably would invest a lot more money in safety systems and visual systems that could decouple from other airplanes. Any other questions? Thank you.
We're going to take our first break, so as I figured, we have more questions here, so let's still stay on track and be back at 10:30 after a networking break. So 10:30 we'll pick back up.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Can I get this downloaded? I don't have it sitting around.
So
It's for this afternoon. On that one down there?
Yeah.
Do you have a flash drive?
I believe Matt, who's up there in front of the podium, does.
Okay.
If not, we can transfer it via Dropbox.
Okay.
So we got options.
Thank you.
This is our people. He's from Lawrence Berkeley Labs. And this is Terry Spurlock. You need to know Terry. Terry's from Ag Extension Office. Terry, these guys will be on the format. Kelly's got us. As well, so they've got some of the amendments. Former bear crops. What do you got, So anyway, y'all can get us here. I got rid of all my
There's a money people.
There's no updates in the process too. Hopefully it's
Can we see my flash card?
Where do you put it? Is it in one of the computers? That's where would be your most likely.
Everybody, even here.
What about now? Test, test, 1, 2. Test. Does that work? Still do it, all right. Test, test. 1, 2. Test. The tester. Test, test. Test, test. Today, talking about drones. Test, test. 1, 2. Test, test. 1, 2. Can you hear me? Is there an echo? Test, test. 1, 2. Is that better?
Exactly, that's what I'm gonna try back and say, yeah. So yours is the last presentation on that.
What about now? Test?
Very good, all right, now we can have that back. Thank you.
I wasn't, so it's a funny thing that Troy, I run all the time, stuff like that, usually, there's far less people talk about it, like Thursday. There was like a bunch of people that jumped off the hat, I told her, you get them, this is like, I also wrote, and that's what we
Test, test.
So
Yeah, yeah. So that being said, give it time, but I want to, you know, we said, I just want to do this month, 12 hours. I don't know if the dean would say, oh, sure, John, go ahead. Yeah, I spoke at Archidel last spring. Another person might have ever been to Archidel. Is that where they got a license? Some kind of gas line over there? Okay. Have you ever seen it? Yeah, okay. Yeah, when I was going there, I was giving a presentation on survey. Yeah. So I said, well, John, look for the line. Yeah. Okay, Gertie. Yeah, I'm interested. I'm very interested in your program. Yeah. Yeah, appreciate it.
So I was
Rehab, how are you?
It's so nice to meet you.
It's been so long since I met you.
It's great
See you again, say hi. You too.
Keeping you busy. You didn't want to interrupt.
I'm answering questions.
Oh, are you getting? How many people do you have?
We have 6 people watching right now. We've got up to 10, which is pretty good. And we've got people.
You have a limit of 10?
No.
Oh,
no,
gotcha.
we've had up.
Oh, they're coming in and out.
Yeah. But the neat thing is we figured out where the traffic was because it's kind of hidden.
Yeah, you have to open it up.
Open it up in YouTube.
Oh, it's in YouTube. I
It is. But Max figured out how to set it up and get it running yesterday. I'm excited.
So what's the
well, we could have done it that way that he actually, we ended up using Wirecast, which is wire we're using for streaming.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah,
So
you
we're
showed
using
us.
Wirecast through,
Does
but.
that require a license?
No.
It's free?
Oh, I think so.
They put in a, what? They're putting, yeah.
There's a. So with anyway, so it's streamed, but it is streaming through YouTube. And the thing is, so yesterday, we sent out, the way YouTube Live works now is every time you stop streaming, it automatically starts encoding and processing the video. So that link, goes to a dead video or goes to a video. So we had to. There's not any documentation, not any easy documentation that says how to. Yeah, but we figured out by looking at the chat.
You just leaving it running, or?
No, how to send it to our channel.
Oh,
you had to go find the channel ID, and then you have to put it in. Anyway.
You think they would?
Sounds pretty complicated.
But yeah, you're learning on.
It was one of those things where
learning curve.
We were excited. Yeah.
You made it work. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, because momentarily we had that like.
Oh yeah, I hate that. Being an IT. At least you figured it out before today too.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, and so it's very exciting to see something because I didn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
When we started. And we have 7 people watching us. You can probably hear us.
I went to use laptop, so I forgot he's got that capture card. It's an internal, it's like a...
Yeah, well, we figured it out.
So we're going to go ahead and start and do our best to stay on, because I knew the challenge we'd have is probably staying on time, which is guys networking and talking is exactly what we want to happen. Special Agent Maldonado is going to talk to us today about the FAA and FBI use this, gives an update from what we saw last year with things that have changed and the most current information as they go in the direction we're going. So appreciate the fact that we traveled in here and spent travel money to get here and talk to us, and always well received. So with no further ado.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Ham. And thank you guys for being here. Thanks for the invite again. We presented last year at the other location, and we are glad to be here. Just a show of hands, if you were not here last year, have you heard about the Office of Security and Hazardous Materials, FAA Division? Anybody? No? That's why we're here. The FAA, we are a small division within the FAA. My name is Kenny Maldonado, and I am a special agent with the Office of Security. We work under the National Security Programs and Incident Response. We're not air traffic and we're not flight standards. Our UAS integration office falls within flight standards group. They have undergone a complete reorganization. But these are your two major line of businesses within the FAA. On the contrary, we're just a little smaller division, and our purpose is to protect FAA facilities, to ensure the integrity of the NAS. In addition to that, we do ramp checks and we do a lot of outreach training, in addition to doing hazardous materials investigations. So our division, even though we're small, we cover a broad range of investigations. We're not inspectors. We are actual investigators of the FAA. So overall, the mission has not changed in the FAA. And the mission basically is we are continuing to provide the safest, most efficient aerospace system in the world. So whether someone's working air traffic, flight standards, or even at the Office of National Security Programs, our base concern is safety. This is our area of responsibility. We have about 20 agents that do specifically law enforcement assistance program. We work directly with law enforcement, especially the FBI, Department of Justice. Just recently, we've been working with our Air Force partners because they've been getting a lot of drone incursions in and near surrounding Air Force bases, which is affecting their flight patterns. And it is causing a lot of havoc. So we've been working with local law enforcement near Air Force facilities. We've been at Vance Air Force Base. I also went to Randolph and trained there.
with local law enforcement. I'm scheduled to go to Wichita Falls and do training there. So since last year, we didn't want to repeat the same things that we talked about last year. Since last year, there's a couple things that have changed. Obviously, the hobbyist UAS registration, that is no longer mandated. But the FAA still is encouraging registration. The reason for that is we're finding, and law enforcement is finding UASs everywhere. And if they don't have a registration number, we can't track them. We can't find them or return them to their rightful owner. That's why we still encourage the registration, but it is optional. We do have and have been very forth and aggressive creating a UAS waiver and exemption teams. There's still a backlog of those, but with the teams now that are just specifically focusing on those, they're moving those waivers and clearing them. Last year, one of the last slides I presented was your UAS focal point in Arkansas, in Little Rock. His name is Mike Minix. He has actually moved on to the waiver team. So we have a new point of contact for those of y'all that need any assistance here locally. We do have a Flight Standards District Office in Little Rock, and I'll get to that information toward the end. The FAA also, our UAS integration team, has enacted a COA team to facilitate public use and law enforcement and first responders to get those COAs approved. It's as you guys know, sometimes it's easier to put a set of guidelines, but not everyone's going to read those guidelines. So a lot of the calls that we're getting was, well, how do I do this? Well, how do I do this? Well, we just send people to the website, which is most current that information that is out there. But we soon realized that sometimes we just need to not just send people to a website, but just to guide them through the process. So we also enacted a COA team. And then we talk about a little bit at the end about the, just recently it happened in federal court, there was a preemption case, and we'll just kind of highlight those. As far as some cities, how they're enacting ordinances, and some are kind of venturing into limiting how people operate a drone, and that's not what the FAA is looking to. So, who is not familiar at all with unmanned aircraft systems? Good. Okay. All right. So that eliminates about 4 slides. But anyways, for those that are on the streaming video, a UAS basically is you need 3 parts. You need an unmanned aircraft, you need ground control, and then you have your command and control links. There's a variety of names. I think we all know them by now. But most important is the use. So what do we use UASs for? Anybody? Do I need to single out people? Come on. Huh?
Public safety.
Public safety. What else? Mapping. Excellent. Anyone else over here on this side?
Fine.
Huh? What? Define. Excellent. 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 There's many uses. Of course, one of them is being not putting humans at risk. Continuous operations are possible. It costs less. But last year, when I attended this training, I realized there's a lot more. And the agriculture person, the person who did the presentation as far as the mapping and the crops, it was very interesting. And I still use your slide here regarding how some crops and not analyzing the soil, which was very impressive, and not a lot of people see that. All they're seeing is, I'm being harassed by this drone, or someone's watching me, or the police are doing surveillance on me. So that's not the whole use of what the purpose of the drones are meant for. And now they're using them for crop dusting. They're using them for doing studies. So it's very impressive. I'm going to talk a little bit about Harvey because actually I work out of the regional office in Fort Worth, Texas. So when Harvey hit Texas, I was very involved with the efforts down there, and we'll talk about some pros and cons that we dealt with. But it is definitely a great resource for search and rescue, at least identifying people that need help. When you only have, what, 2, 3, 4, maybe 10 helicopters, but you have 40 drones that can do the same thing. But we're going to talk about some pros and cons about that. The FAA's authority, aerospace is public use. We just regulate it. Aircraft, UAS are considered aircrafts, and any UAS flown outdoors operate in the national airspace systems. So on our side, as far as the law enforcement assistance program, we've been working with state and local and also our federal partners to see how some laws impact UAS. Some states are more proactive than others. If I'm not mistaken, I think Arkansas just passed a UAS privacy law just recently. Is that still the case? Anybody?
They did.
Dr. Ham?
They did.
Yes, okay. And that's great because some states are not as forthcoming and as proactive as others. So my job in our office is to educate, to train, and do as much as we can on the law enforcement side, on the public sector. We do a lot of outreach, and I think Dr. Ham later on is going to talk about a FAST program, the FAA safety team, and they go out and they do a lot of training. These are inspectors, and they're real good at, they're experts at UASs. So there's a lot of information out there. One of the things we always recommend, and it's this app right here, before you fly. Who does not have this app downloaded on their phone as of today? Who doesn't have? So everyone has the app downloaded? Come on. If you do get 2 minutes, go to Google Play or your Google store. Go and type in before you fly. Just like that, the letter B, the number 4, the letter U, and fly. And download this app. If you're going to get involved with drones, you need to know where and some of the tools that the FAA is putting out there for free for you to operate your drone efficiently. This app is free to download. It has several alerts, TFRs, NOTAMs, notice to airmen. There's a lot of information out there. If you enable the GPS location, it'll pinpoint where you're at, and it'll tell you whether you're within 5 miles of an airport. So please go ahead and do that. And if you do encounter anyone, any student, forward that information. Let them know that, hey, as a UAS operator, it's our job to educate and make sure everyone's on the same page. Because just like Dr. Ham mentioned earlier, what we're trying to avoid is collisions with manned aircraft. We're trying to avoid fatalities or accidents. So with that being said, every city, every county, every department that we meet with, they're starting to put a lot of the signage up on areas. We're dealing with, drones dropping, contraband on phones over prisons. So they're having, you name it. So they're having to kind of look at, people, dropping things over correctional facilities. So now Texas has implemented, or just recently implemented, one of those as a critical infrastructure kind of statute, where they're including correctional facilities, because a couple years ago we weren't even thinking about that. But the criminal mind is an untapped flow of information, right? One of the things that we stress are the A's, the 3 A's of flying an aircraft. And Dr. Ham mentioned it earlier at his, on his opening statement is, we want those people that go and buy a drone, let's say at Walmart or an Amazon or whatnot, to understand how much responsibilities they have to operate something up in the air. I mean, it's not a kite. You can damage property. You can't hurt someone if you don't, if you lose control of that. So we want them and encourage everyone to get their certificate, their 107. And I'm glad I hear and I'm seeing a lot more training facilities and flight training campuses offering that, even universities, which is great. It gives those that want to go that route an opportunity to learn, not just as a minor, but as a major. So we try to understand or help understand that how to operate that aircraft. You just don't. There's a lot more than just flying it up. There's wind, right? There's altitude. There's conditions, and just the way each controller is set up is very different. On the picture where the military, the lieutenant colonel showed, I mean, that joystick is a lot different than your regular controller. So there's many different modes to understand and know. As an airman, you are responsible for that aircraft. So we try to educate those newbie pilots, because they are pretty much pilots. They're not certified pilots, but they are pilots. And what they need to be and have proper authorization to operate that drone legally. And that's a fine line where we are seeing a lot more of the hobbyists venturing on the commercial realm. And it just takes a few months or a few weeks to just take the course and understand and generate money if that's what they want. They have to understand the airspace. I mean, there's just because you're in the backyard, that means you can't go 1,000 feet up. So those are some of the things that we're trying to educate. And there's a lot of materials out there that are available. As far as the FAA, we are working with several big companies on our Pathfinder programs, expanding those operations and beyond visual line of sight. The test sites, I mean, I don't need to go over this, but several test sites are crucial for the development and training. And then the centers of excellence. I'm actually going to be going to the Lone Star Center of Excellence down in Corpus at the end of this month to do another presentation there. And it's just amazing how within a few years this has taken a storm, and there's no stopping the UAS technology and what we see for the future. As far as UAS detection initiatives, we are working with several contractors, including our federal partners with the FBI, DOJ, and Homeland Security. I believe Sensor Fusion did a presentation last year, or a division of Sensor Fusion, and they've been really busy. But we are working to try to eliminate what the FBI director had mentioned, possible UAS terrorist incident. So as far as law enforcement, any law enforcement here present? Okay. So I kind of talked about this slide last year, and it talks about the 4 modes that as FAA security is on the forefront is how are these being used against people or against government, as far as for surveillance purposes, smuggling, disruption, and weaponization. I think everyone's seen the video of the drone and the gun firing from the north. I think it was in Boston or Massachusetts or Connecticut. I'm sorry. So what we've done is the FAA has come out with these law enforcement reference cards to help local law enforcement deal with a drone operator, a UAS operator, and encountering them and talking to them. We have established a 24/7 at a regional operations center so people can call and report these. Some examples, and more law enforcement are taking action for operators that are not operating legally or impeding rescue efforts or using that drone for other purposes. For example, just recently a municipal court found a man guilty of reckless endangerment, and this stemmed from losing his drone and hitting someone at a parade. Police arrested a man flying a drone close to a helicopter, and they arrested him for hampering rescue efforts. Just recently, there was a federal law that came out that enacted that will basically issue a $20,000 civil penalty if you impede any rescue efforts, and that's on the civil side. On the federal. So, as far as reckless endangerment, a lot of cities are using these types of statutes to go after drone operators that are either impeding or endangering the public. And then a lot of privacy concerns. And some states are more proactive than others. California also has a noise ordinance. So a lot of cities, they're using state and local established laws to issue citations. Some of them, Washington State has an obstruction of law enforcement officer statute, and some others are either assault, battery, trespassing, or any state aviation violation. So as you can see, a lot of, as the use of drones is increasing, law enforcement is also responding the same way by issuing citations. And what we want to do is we want to train law enforcement to understand what the drone operator should or should not have. And at the same time, we want the drone operator to know where to operate that drone safely. So we work together. We have worked with cities and counties, myself in Texas, drafting and helping them with our legal counsel to aid them in drafting either ordinances or how to write up certain statutes. We also do a lot of training to law enforcement. And what we ask from everyone is you know, that old saying, you see something, hear something, you say something, report it. If you see something suspicious, either report it to the FBI or report it to your local law enforcement, and hopefully there's a way for them to get back to the FAA. A lot of the reports that we're getting, they're coming from pilots themselves, especially near airports, and this is the flow of how we get law enforcement to respond. Vice versa, we're also getting a lot of reports from the ground, and at some point it'll get to our office and or our inspection flight standards district office. So there are a lot of resources out there that we have available. Most of you guys, if you haven't gone to the FAA website, it's right here. It's www.faa.gov/UAS. There's a lot of information. We, as I mentioned earlier, we have agents throughout the nation. So I cover Texas and all 4 surrounding states. So Arkansas is part of my area of operations. I think Dr. Ham mentioned something about shooting down a drone. That is a federal crime. So let's not shoot down any drones. But there are a lot of counter surveillance activities going out there. And how can it be done right? And that's the whole thing. Because if you just sit with that drone, I mean, it's gonna fall somewhere, right? Unless it returns to home. So where is it gonna fall? So those are a lot of things that we're looking at. We're still in the education and compliance enforcement phase. We are seeing a lot more legal enforcement actions taken on drone operators. Because the real issues can potentially impact, you know, the general public, national security concerns, damage to infrastructure, disruption of air traffic, and hindering activity for first responders. So just going over current issues that are going on right now. We talked about Hurricane Harvey. Initially, it was a great response that we got a lot of folks down there to help. And in an unprecedented way, FAA issued over 39 or 40 UAS exemptions or waivers to operate within a TFR. So that was one of the things that worked really, really great. Unfortunately, we had some drone operators that didn't know what they were doing, and they were flying outside of the TFR where they were allowed to operate, and that caused a lot of problems. So just like we mentioned earlier, I mean, whenever a disaster occurs, we definitely want everyone to help if they can. And we had a lot of volunteers, people coming from the northeast, from the northwest, you name it. But we want to do it right. We're just running into, this is one of the heat maps information that we get. This is actually for August, and this particular heat map shows those drone incursions that are happening within 5 miles. The red drones are those within the 5 miles of an airport, and then the black drones are outside the 5 miles, but near or affecting air traffic. So as you can tell, there's some cities and some areas are more prone to activity at the airports, and that's what's troubling for our office. But we're working hand in hand. Hopefully, when people download the drone before you fly app and they understand to contact our air traffic, tower and either and do it safely, we'll eliminate what we just recently heard about at the entry, and it just happened. Luckily, no one did pass away. There was not an accident resulting from the drone interfering with a manned aircraft. But it could have been worse. It could have been a lot worse. I mentioned earlier about the preemption court case, and it happened in Massachusetts just last month. And while the title and the heading that you saw online was, drone law struck down by federal preemption. If you look into the details, the court found only 3 items that were preemptive in nature, and one of those, or we'll go through, was the registration requirement. Well, because hobbyists are no longer required to be registered, so it preempted federal law. Then the location and altitude, basically they couldn't restrict altitude operation. And then beyond visual line of sight, there's already law that pertains to that. So those are the 3 items that the court found that were preemptive. All the other items of the actual ordinance remain the same, and they mainly deal with interfering with manned aircraft, reckless and careless, negligent manner, surveillance. Capturing people's images and audio or physical impression without people's consent or expectation of privacy, emergency, operations response, intent to harass, annoy, and assault another person, and then violation of any federal, state law. So those particular items of the ordinance were okay as far as the court said. But there were some items that this particular city had preemptive law. So there is case now, but one of the things I always like to throw out there is the e-hang, right? The drone Uber, it's coming, right? Some people think it's sooner than 2021, from what they say. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
Reasonable expectation of privacy laws are state generally speaking, but then we see this complicated relationship with the airspace issues. Do you have any guidance? Is there any guidance that you can give on what that is now meaning, given that we have the ability to fly?
That is a great question for our legal department. State and federal, I mean, there's different definitions of it and thresholds, so I could answer that question.
Well, I know in the Barbara Streisand case, that's how we call it, the ability of an aircraft operator to photograph her from a normal flying height was found okay by the U.S. Supreme Court, but we don't really have any guidance now.
Until it gets challenged in court. So.
There was a Supreme Court case maybe a year ago in Florida where the police were using a 400
But that was in Florida, right? Okay. Anyone else? I'd like to bring Agent Dan Sturgis, local FBI.
Do you have a microphone?
I do, actually.
I don't need a microphone.
No, here's one. We actually have one. We had you prepared.
All right, good deal.
I can give you it for you.
All right.
Get copies of the PowerPoints.
Okay, try it out.
Can you hear me?
It's Mike Ford.
4? Try it out.
Can you hear me? Good. Good thing about not having a PowerPoint is you're not stuck to the lectern up there, so I can walk around. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes with you. I'm Dan Sturgill. I'm a Weapons of Mass Destruction Coordinator for the FBI for the state of Arkansas. I live in Fort Smith. Been there about 21 years. Have a daughter that goes to Walton College of Business right across the way here. So I think she parks in the same garage. I think the world of that college because she already has a job and she graduates this year. And I'm convinced that she got her internship with Amazon because she came from that college. They do great work. I'm very appreciative of it. Whenever you have a kid that can have a job before they graduate, you're batting 100. All right, well, 1,000, excuse me. Batting 1,000. So I'm glad to be here. I just want to touch on a couple of things, and Kenny does the regulation stuff, and I'm kind of the outreach and the prevention side of things for our federal government. Being the WMD guy, I kind of look at the bad side of the house. I mean, we've got some great UASs up here. They do great things. My role as the FBI WMD coordinator is look to see how they can be used in other ways, the bad ways, the way that terrorists could use them. And when we talk WMD and we talk about payloads, we're worried about chemical. We've got our special agent bomb technician up there, J.T. Coleman. You know, he's here today along with my supervisor. We're talking about chemical, biological. Remember right after 9/11, we were worried about all the crop dusters in the state, and I found out we have more aerial applicators than any other state, licensed aerial applicators, than any other state in the union. So we were concerned about the biologicals, which are kind of difficult, radiological and nuclear. So we look at these things, and we look at this great tool we have that can be used in agriculture and many other business, Amazon maybe, you know, they're talking about it. So with the FBI, I'm concerned about large gatherings where a WMD can be applied, or the terrorists can get more, so to speak, bang for their buck, and we can use this with the UASs. So as a result, we do a lot of outreach, and that's kind of what I'm doing today. The academic community, with the hobbyists, with the public sector, private sector, who actually construct these, just to provide us with information, because my job is prevention. I want our state to be safe. If when you decide to go to a Razorback game or a Bikes, Blues, or barbecue, I want you to feel safe at those events. So I've actually brought some handouts. I don't have a neat app, you know, that like FAA. We're not that quite advanced. They have made great advances. I don't know if y'all came last year. We had a guy from our headquarters that came and gave a great presentation. We are making advances. We also are noticing our weaknesses. We call this a vulnerability. It's a vulnerability which can be used by the bad guys to hurt our citizens of our state. But anyway, if there's any questions, please grab these trifolds. If you have classes, if you've got students, if you want to distribute them. The most important thing in this trifold is basically what y'all have been hearing earlier today, and you'll probably hear the rest of the day, are the phone numbers on the back. That's what I always kind of stress. You know, we're so busy in our life, but sometimes I just post stuff on the refrigerator or on your desk, put it up on your, your file cabinet, and just have that phone number. Give us a call. If anything is suspicious, I know Kenny mentioned, see something, say something. Give us a call, give us information if the people are acting suspicious or they're acting funny, asking really kind of off or weird questions, and just give us a call, and that's what we'll do. And it'll be our job, and we'll take it from there and try to interview those people and hopefully prevent something from occurring in our state. Any questions? Great to be here. Thank you, University of Arkansas. I wanted her to go to University of Tennessee, my alma mater. She wanted to come up here, so I couldn't be happier.
So,
Yeah, she was. She's smarter than Dad.
I just have a question.
Yes, sir.
As a commercial drug dealer, we deal with all various types of people, both on the consumer side and the business side. And sometimes we get people out of the blue, we don't know who they are, out of the number, international number, asking us.
Internationals, please.
Yeah.
Would you give us a call on that?
Yeah. So my question is, what, our manufacturers, we always sign these massive documents saying we'll do this and that, or we won't do this and that. From an FBI or security perspective, is that something that you would like, especially obviously our Kansas dealers, to say, hey, look, this guy called, here's his number, don't know who he is?
That's all you need. That's all. We can do the rest. We can check our systems. And we do that not only, we do it in other industries, just not yours. I mean, if somebody's calling a chemical company wanting large amounts of chemicals and they may be from another place, we'll do that. And I'll give you my phone number and I'm getting close to the end, so I'm running out of business cards. Yes, sir.
I've got a question. Probably more for you. So I teach down at University of Arkansas myself.
Okay.
I actually spoke with one of the high schools on Monday. She asked me to come up and speak about mapping and all this stuff, and it's more of a question of compliance and trying to give the teachers. She said, John, I've got all these drones, and we don't know what to do with them. And so it's more of a question of what kind of outreach is being given to the high schools, because now you're getting drones in the high schools, and these teachers, they don't know what to do with them.
Yeah, if you want, write down or take a picture of this slide here. This is the most current. Let me look at it real quick. This is your UAS focal point for the Little Rock Physical. His name is Shane Benedetto. That his sole purpose is to work and deal with UAS related matters. He's here locally in the state, so reach out to him, call him, send him an email. Just let him know that you were here at the UAS summit, and myself, and I provided his contact information. The FAA agent that covers this area is Agent Medina. Either way, if you can't reach any of those, I'll give you my business card at the end. That way, you just reach out to me. We'll get you that information, and we are here to help. I believe you're going to do a small presentation on the FAST program. They're also there to help, and they can come and meet with that particular principal. Okay? Any other questions?
Dr. Ham, thank you for inviting us. And thank you very much. I'm going to leave these trifles. Please grab some if you got classes or if you got groups. I don't know if U of A has a UAS society or whatnot. We'll just, if you can pass those out, I'd appreciate it. If y'all ever have any questions, call those numbers on the back or just Google us, and we're on our phone number in Little Rock, and just ask for the WB coordinator, and I'll pick up the phone and give you my cell phone.
And you're located in Little Rock?
I'm in Fort Smith, but I cover the whole state. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, come on forward. We're going to let's grab some chairs from here and we'll just bring up for this next presentation. We will. That will help us with that. Okay.
Hey, Rich, while you're setting up, I just want to, for some of the folks in the audience, Candida Meek is with our office, Research Compliance, and does our expert control. So if there are any questions related to this, we would prefer that we ask the questions first before we go down the road and then find out we should be doing something. If you've got something related to export control, please reach out to Candida. Cynthia Sides is over on the far side. Raise your hand, Cynthia. Cynthia is our director of the Office of Industry Engagement. So if you're from outside the university and trying to figure out who you should be talking to or who can help you with a research problem, reach out to Cynthia and she'll direct you or help you make connections. So a couple of important people in my office.
So, and for those in academia, we were having this conversation a minute ago. We teach the foundations course. Candida came and gave the briefing because you can read the DARS, and you can read that till you're blue in the face. And understanding the export control piece, not that easy. So she's an expert and a great resource. and I'm sure some of the other institutions have the same sort of role, but we can help you with that about what the exemptions are. She's the right person. We rely on her. So this presentation, we're gonna sit here as kind of a panel. We're gonna pass the microphone back and forth. But what we refer to as the McIntyre Farm Project, or some refer to it as the Greg Tupelo Duck Club. Is that what it is? So one of those hard things in academia you have to do before and through another meeting here, Jay McIntyre asked some questions about something that he was doing, and this is as much of a collaboration as you can get. You'll see by the individuals that are involved to come up with a way to add some value to agriculture and what farmers can do in the state. So what I'm going to do is as each one of the slides come up, when we get to that point, we're just going to hand the microphone back and forth, and then everybody will have questions. So each of us have a little piece of that, and then we'll have questions at the end. So we'll start with you, Jay.
Thanks, Rich. Thank you all for coming. I graduated from the University of Arkansas in 1984, and one of the things that the university taught me to do is be curious. And so what started off, I was at a tech conference called Future in Review in Park City, Utah. The conference is going on now. I left there to come here. And I heard Ben Brown from the university, or from Lawrence Berkeley Labs, talk about the research they're doing on the microbiome. And they started to talk about some amendments, microbial amendments, for those of you that aren't familiar with biologicals. This thing, organic fertilizer, a stimulant for the microbes in the soil. And then if you could do certain things with microbial amendments, you wouldn't need as much phosphate fertilizer. And I got kind of interested in that because of phosphate. Hard rock phosphate gets put on the soil and it's not used by the plant. It runs off into the streams, and we're surrounded by wetlands around my farm. And so, you get algae blooms and things like that. Not good. And so Ben and I had lunch, and then we started talking about, well, hey, Ben, why don't you take some of this stuff out of the research in California and let's go do it on soybeans in Arkansas. And he got excited about that. And after about 4 trips out to Lawrence Berkeley Labs, we have come up with an interesting project, and at the National Lab Day, if you all ever have another chance to get to go to one of those, if you ever hear one happening, go. Because we had Dr. Rankin put this on. We had all the national labs here. We had Horst Simon, who's the deputy director of Lawrence Berkeley Labs here in Arkansas, and Mary Matson, and some really terrific people who came and I shared this idea with them, and they got behind it. So now what started off as a lunch conversation has turned into a large-scale collaboration. We had 12 PhDs at the farm. I was the only non-credentialed person there last week. And, we did some very interesting things, and we probably came up with at least $10 million of research ideas, don't you think, Terry? We can really spend some money, so if any of you guys are altruistic and have some ideas about where to get funding for this, is good. So let me just say what has come to be is we started to look at the effects and to test certain microbial amendments. And then to do that, we'll go back to the previous slide a little bit. We started out that, and then as we started thinking about all the different inputs and everything we need to monitor it, and I started to think about the farming model, where I would say that the farmer abdicates his IP. It's kind of not vernacular per se, and the farmer is dependent on the large-scale chemical companies for a seed prescription, a fertilizer, or a pesticide, or a herbicide. He has no information to do anything other than take their prescription. So when I think about my trading career and experience building software, there's no real actionable intelligence for him to do anything different. And I started investigating more about the farming model and started thinking about, well, this is really not a very good thing. I'm a landowner. I have no idea what this guy's doing on my land. And I know that the chemical company doesn't have a fiduciary responsibility to me, except more chemicals. So we're interested in achieving, building something that our goal now is to develop knowledge and tools through this collaboration to make a more sustainable farming practice. Lower inputs, lower cost, increase the health of the soil. Our soils are 1 to 2% organic matter. Probably before it started farming, 10 to 11%. Not a great sustainable way. Farming works because you add a lot of amendments, you add a lot of fertilizer. But let's get the soil healthy. You know, guess what? And that just lines up exactly with what Berkeley's vision is for creating a more sustainable planet. And guess what? If you increase that organic matter, we sequester a lot of carbon. That's all very good, but it's all about making farmers more profitable and sustainable and creating the asset we have. So let's go to the next slide. So the big goal, and we're talking about drones here today, that became a big component of that, and a lot of derivatives came out of that. Nicola will talk about this slide here, but the big audacious goal that we started thinking about in terms of imaging was, could we correlate ground truth and microbial activity and activity in the plants with certain imaging spectrum? So we looked at a lot of drones, we talked to a lot of drone companies, and all of those commercial drones are focusing in the visible light spectrum. And where can we discover beyond that? We were using Red Edge, and that's imaging processing, so we'll talk about all that. And then further, Nicola is an expert in the hyperspectral. Could we discover specific bands beyond the visible light that we could design then sensors to go find those markers? That's kind of the big goal from the drone perspective. Let's go to the next slide. And then I'll just finish with this, that as we learned from Cujo, you know, flying these drones is a collaborative effort. And man, did we discover this is not off-the-shelf plug and play. Man, and I have my brother here, and he can tell you about the efforts and the misefforts that we have. So we had Rich here with the Lancaster that we acquired and crashed. We have Craig Ulrich doing an EC measurement. We have Malcolm Williamson that's been phenomenal. So I would say in terms of his work, in terms of see those targets, we had GPS located targets on all of the fields so we could correlate the imagery and then process it. And so the resources that have University, Dr. Rankin, have contributed to this project have been terrific, along with Terry from the Extension Office. Who's next?
So I'll talk a little bit and then some about what we hope to bring, but a couple of things were, when Jay mentioned the Lancaster, remember that thing I told you about, he doesn't make the same mistake twice, but he's made them all once? So that would fit into some of those things of learning that we could help. But the primary thing, I think, is new things we've developed about airmanship and aeronautical decision-making on when it makes sense to fly, the difference in fixed wing or rotor, and it has to do with how the sensor operates also. You don't have a gimbal on a fixed wing. You've got some things that are different in how you would look at the collection, and so consequently, things that you think about, wind, automatic flight planning, and the like, that looks to be an automatic setup that you could just program this and let it fly and go. Not so much as we discovered. And so we spent a lot of time learning on the fixed wing. And also, one of the things you learn about a fixed wing, with the exception of some very high-end units, you really don't land those, you just have a controlled crash. What you hope on those is that the controlled crash is at a low enough altitude and airspeed that you don't have any damage. And we had one or two times where that wasn't exactly that way. So how you select those two things is really important. And honestly, there's people that write, but there's nothing where a student would come other than what we teach in class through experience, where you can say, here's the checklist to make a decision. And I can see Brad and others shaking, because people in industry have learned a lot of these already, because they had to learn it to do this effectively. Then, one of the things, flight planning optimizations, and I think that Malcolm and McLean will talk some about what they did specifically, but looking at the way to, I'll give you an example. The first collection we did with the Lancaster took us 6 or 7 hours to collect those. And I think the last one we were down to about an hour and a half or 2 hours or so we ran on. So there's some reasons that makes a lot of difference to you about solar angle, time, how many batteries you have to have, etc. And so those decisions on planning ahead of time are really important when you do research, or if you're just, an industry making an application. So we hope we bring that as well. And when I talked in the first brief, when we look long term, we had this discussion at the farm last week. If we get to the end state that a farmer can use it, an Arkansas farmer would use this, and then be able to get some data to help increase their yield, if we tell them that they have to spend 6 hours 1 day a week, that's just not going to happen. So we have to, one of the things, the longer term is for us to optimize this so that it has a real application that would work. All right.
I just want to comment a little bit that, in many cases when we're thinking about flying drones, UASs, we're looking for optimum conditions to go fly. But if we're doing something like agriculture, we've got a timeline. We've got, we want images every week or every 2 weeks. We've only got a day or two leeway to do that, and if it's windy or cloudy or rainy, that's a serious constraint. So you need to be able to work around that as much as possible. So for this particular research, we're also looking at very high resolution images, much more so than most folks are using for farming. So we wanted ground spacing of pixels of 4 centimeters or less, which is going to require really low altitude and slow speed. So obviously wind considerations are a big deal, particularly with the fixed wings, but even with the multi-rotor, it's going to affect your battery life. So the fixed wing Lancaster 5 that we were using had an airspeed of 12 meters a second, which at the altitude that we're flying was going to be marginal for being slow enough to be able to even take the pictures. It's just right at the borderline there. Furthermore, at the altitude we're flying, there are trees at the edges of these fields, and we started to realize this is a pretty serious hazard here. This may not be the best platform for this application, even though it is a pretty advanced platform. Later on, we switched these sensors over to McLean's DJI Inspire 2. This is a MicroSense Red Edge multispectral camera, and it requires to get good data, you've got to have a second sensor mounted on the top of the drone that records light that's hitting the ground, basically, so you can calibrate for, you can normalize for differences in lighting as clouds pass by and things like that. And there's also, it's got its own dedicated GPS receiver. So we were able to put those on this Inspire 2. We have it out here? No. It's a mid-sized drone, and it actually handled this rather well, thereby avoiding the velocity and obstacle issues. So the other challenges that we had, though, were with this particular sensor, we're looking at 5 images per location. These are 1280 by 960 pixel cameras on it, and so we're collecting, for the larger of the fields we're flying, we're collecting more than 5,800 images from single flight. And you can't break it up because we're using ground control points to get the accuracy that we need for repeating and be able to compare this data from multiple flights. And so it turned out that the online software that had been purchased was not going to work out because we couldn't upload more than 5,000 images to process at one time. So that wasn't going to work. Another challenge is for every one of these data sets, no matter what software you're using, you've got to go in there and manually match up targets in the photos. Most of these packages will do some automated alignment, but you've got to guide it some. So there's probably a good hour of prepping every data set going into this. And then you've got to process the data, which is going to take several hours on your computer. And also, of course, we were looking for reflectance layers. So if you're doing NDVI and any other indices, you're looking at data that's not just a picture of particles on the ground, we want to have normalized, calibrated reflectance in each of these bands. And so we've got to have a calibration plate to do that. It's going to be imaged on every flight on the ground, which the original vendor didn't supply with the camera. You know, this is one of these things that you need to ask about when you're talking to salespeople. And as I mentioned before, in order to be able to deal with changing lighting conditions, you've got to have this light sensor on top of the drone that's recording the ambient light in each of the 5 bands to match the sensor. And again, the Lancaster 5 that we first used, that fixed wing plane, did not have that sensor and did not have a provision for the sensor. And again, the salespeople failed to tell us that that was so. We had to discover that ourselves. So basically, the data we recorded with that plane was useless.
So I became involved with this project when Rich called me one day and said, "Hey, can you come to a farm in Humphrey and we're flying a Lancaster that's like the one you've got?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And quickly I found out there was a lot of field work to do, and so I became sort of the grunt in this project as well, because my laboratory is very good at going out and taking a lot of samples all the time, all over the state of Arkansas, and getting those processed. So for this imagery, we talk about this a lot when in the particular groups that I go and talk with or work with. You know, for any of this aerial imagery to make sense or to be usable in agriculture, it has to make sense biologically, it has to make sense economically. So there's a level of ground truthing that has to be accomplished with all of this. And of course, as part of Berkeley laboratory collaboration with Arkansas, you know, there's more than just engineers involved in this. There's more than just landowner involved in this. There's people that are interested and do actively do research on bioinformatics and understanding the plant, the phytobiome, the microbiome, understanding these microorganisms in the root rhizosphere as well as on the plant, and how they might change with these particular treatments that were deployed. And so to be able to measure all of this, my task in this was to go out and sample at these georeference positions and make sure that we got plants that were usable from the field to Berkeley, California. And if you're familiar with APHIS and regulations, and you just can't ship plant samples all over the world across state lines, even though the pathogens of the fire ants aren't interested in the arbitrary state boundary that you've drawn on a map. Our government, APHIS, certainly is. So our samples are safely stored in a -80 in Fayetteville. So there's been some challenges to make this go this first year, but I think we've addressed them pretty well. And hopefully, I think we will do some DNA extractions and get around the APHIS issue that we have. We'll just send DNA out to Berkeley and let them do the work from there.
So I am Nicola Falco. I'm a postdoc at the Berkeley National Lab at the Climate and Ecosystem Training Division. And we work a lot on monitoring, environmental monitoring using different platforms and different sensors, from UAV to satellites, from optical and active passive sensors. We are interested in surface characterization, but also below ground characterization, and understand the link between them. And in this project, our role is to develop optimized algorithms that are able to process such data, big data, in order to characterize at plant level the plant behavior in time from the early stage to the yield, and link such behavior to soil characteristics. And as soil characteristics, we meant, like, for example, moisture or decomposition. We go to the biomes level, so how biomes interact with the ecosystem to create nutrients for the plant. And our major interest here is to understand the link, but also identify the cause of changes in growth, for example, natural causes, but also to understand if amendments has a role in this and how. You can go to the next. So here I'm showing you a couple of slides of a couple of algorithms that we have been developing using signal processing, machine learning, applied to images acquired with the UAV, and in this case we have multispectral images. I would like to add that we have been also performing the ground sampling, material soil sampling. We had hyperspectral measurements on the ground at the leaf level and the plant level, so we have a really good data collection from the ground to the plant level, and now we want to scale up at the crop level using UAV. So what we are aiming is to understand and to identify those characteristics that we can monitor to understand the behavior of the plant along the time frame from, as I said, from the early stage when the spruce start to grow and they heal. So we work a lot on the data integration from different data informations like DEM to optical images to create vegetation map that show how the plant health is changing in time, and then we use this to understand if the changing, how the change actually impact on the final yield. We can go to the next. So this is an example of NVI that we compute on the red edge image, and NDVI shows us